Gerard left him. He had scarcely been aware of what he was doing when he carried the packet, unopened, unexamined, to his father. He had feared that he might be tempted to what? To conceal his mother's vindication? Never. Yet the responsibility sat heavy on him, and driven by an irresistible impulse, he had resolved to deprive himself of all power of acting basely by giving at once publicity to all that passed. When he had done this, he felt as if he had applied a match to some fatal rocket which would carry destruction to the very temple and shrine of his dearest hopes, to Elizabeth's happiness and life. But the deed was done. He could but shut his eyes and let the mortal ball proceed towards its destined prey. Gerard was young. He aspired to happiness with all the ardor of youth. While we are young, we feel as if happiness were the birthright of humanity. After a long and cruel apprenticeship, we disengage ourselves from this illusion, or from a yet more difficult sacrifice, the realities that produce felicity, for on earth there are such, though they are too often linked with adjuncts that make the purchase of them cost in the end peace of mind and a pure conscience. Thus was it with Gerard. With Elizabeth, winning her love and making her his own, he felt assured of a life of happiness, but to sacrifice his mother's name, the holy task to which he had dedicated himself from childhood, for the sake of obtaining her, it must not be. With this thought came destruction to the fresh-sprung hopes that adorned his existence. Gerard's poetic and tender nature led him to form sweet dreams of joys derived from a union which would be cemented by affection, sympathy, and enthusiastic admiration of the virtues of his companion. In Elizabeth, he had beheld the embodying of all his wishes. In her eyes, he had read their accomplishment. Her love for her father had first awakened his love. Her wise, simple, upright train of thinking, the sensibility ennobled by self-command, yet ever ready to spring forth and comfort the unhappy, her generosity, her total abnegation of self, her understanding so just and true, yet tempered with feminine aptitude to adapt itself to the situation and sentiments of others. All these qualities, discovered one by one and made dear by the friendship she displayed towards him, had opened the hitherto closed gates of the world's only paradise, and now he found that, as the poet says, evil had entered even there, and the trail of the serpent, marked with slimy poison, the fairest and purest of Eden's flowers. Neville had looked forward to a life of blameless but ecstatic happiness, as her friend, her protector, her husband. Youth, without being presumptuous, is often sanguine. Prodigal of self, it expects, as of right, a full return. Ready to assist Elizabeth in her task of watching over her father's health, who in his eyes was wasting gradually away, he felt that he should be near to soften her regrets and fill his place, and soothe her sinking spirits when struck by a loss which to her would seem so dire. And now Falkner, he believed him to be in a state of health that did not leave him many years to live. He recollected him at Marseille, stretched on his couch, feeble as an infant, the hues of death on his brow. He thought of him as he had seen him that morning, his figure bent by disease, his face ashy pale and worn. He was the man whom, 13 years before, he remembered in upright, proud, and youthful strength. Woe and disease had brought on the ravages of age. He was struck by premature decay. A few years, by the course of nature, he would be laid in his grave. But Gerard could not leave him this respite. He must at once meet him in such encounter as must end in the death of one of the combatants. Whichever that might be, there was no hope for Elizabeth. In either case she lost her all. In either case Falkner would die, and an insuperable barrier be raised between her and her only other friend. Neville's ardent and gentle spirit quivered with agony as he thought of these things. "O ye destructive powers of nature," he cried, "come all, storm, flood, and fire, mingled in one dire whirlwind, or bring the deadlier tortures tyrants have inflicted and martyrs undergone, and say, can any agony equal that which convulses the human heart when writhing under contending passions, torn by contrary purposes? This very morning Elizabeth was all the universe of hope and joy. I would not for worlds have injured one hair of her dear head, and now I meditate a deed that is to consign her to eternal grief." Athwart this tumult of thought came the recollection that he was still in ignorance of the truth. He called to mind the narrative which his father was then reading. Would it reveal aught that must alter the line of conduct which he now considered inevitable? A devouring curiosity was awakened. Leaving his father, he had rushed into the open air, in obedience to the instinct that always leads the unquiet mind to seek the solace of bodily activity. He had hurried into Hyde Park, which then, in the dimness of night, appeared a wide expanse, a limitless waste. He hurried to and fro on the turf. He saw nothing, he was aware of nothing except the internal war that shook him. Now, as he felt the eager desire to get quit of doubt, he fancied that several hours must have elapsed, and that his father must be waiting for him. The clocks of London struck, he counted. It was but 11. He had been there scarcely more than an hour. "Alas for man," said the pitying spirit. "Dearly you pay for your primal fall. Some flowers of Eden you still inherit, but the trail of the serpent is over them all." Paradise and the Peri. Chapter 34. Neville returned home. He paused at the drawing-room door. A slight noise indicated that his father was within. His hand was on the lock, but he retreated. He would not intrude uncalled for. He wandered through the dark, empty rooms till a bell rang. Sir Boyvill inquired for him. He hurried into his presence. He devoured the expression of his countenance with his eyes, trying to read the thought within. Sir Boyvill's face was usually stamped with an unvarying expression of cold self-possession, mingled with sarcasm. These feelings were now at their height. His aged countenance, withered and deep-lined, was admirably calculated to depict the concentrated disdain that sat upon his lips and elevated his brows. He pointed to the papers before him and said in a composed yet hollow voice, "Take these away, read, for it is necessary you should, the amplified confession of the murderer." Gerard's blood ran cold. "Yet why call it a confession?" continued Sir Boyvill, his assumed contempt rising into angry scorn. "From the beginning to the end it is a lie." He would varnish over his unparalleled guilt. He would shelter himself from its punishment, but in vain. "Read, Gerard, read and be satisfied. I have wronged your mother. She was innocent, murdered. Be assured that her vindication shall be heard as loudly as her accusation, and that her destroyer shall die to expiate her death." "Be that my task," said Gerard, trembling and pale from the conflict of passion. "I take the office of vengeance on myself. I will meet Mr. Falkner." "Ha, you think of a duel," cried his father. "Remember your promise, young man. I hold you strictly to it. You do nothing without first communicating with me. You must read these papers before you decide." "I have decided. Be not afraid. I shall not forestall your purpose. I will not challenge the murderer. But in return for this pledge, give me your word that you have no communication with the villain till you see me again. I will not balk you of your revenge, be sure of that, but you must see me first." "I promise," said Gerard. "And one word more," continued Sir Boyvill. "Is there any possibility of this man's escape? Is he wrapped in the security which his lie affords, or has he even now fled beyond our vengeance?" "Be his crimes what they may," replied Neville, "I believe him to entertain a delicate sense of worldly honor. He has promised to remain in his home till he hears from me. He doubtless expects to be challenged, and I verily believe desires to die. I feel convinced that the idea of flight has not crossed his mind. Enough, good night. We are now one, Gerard, united by our love and honor for your wronged mother's memory and by our revenge, dissimilar only in this, that my desire to repair her injuries is more vehement even than yours." Sir Boyvill pressed his son's hand and left him. A few minutes afterward, it would seem, he quitted the house. "Now to my task," thought Neville, "and O thou God, who watchest over the innocent, and yet gavest the innocent into the hands of the destroyer, rule thou the throbbings of my heart, that neither mad hate nor hunger for revenge take away my human nature and turn me into a fiend." He took up the manuscript. At first the words seemed written in fire, but he grew calmer as he found how far back the narration went, and curiosity succeeding to devouring impatience, he became attentive. He read and pitied. All that awoke Sir Boyvill's ire, Falkner's presumption in daring to love, and his long-cherished constancy, excited his compassion. When he came to the account of the meeting of the forsaken lover and happy husband, he found, in the epithets so liberally bestowed, in the contemptuous description of his father, a cause for his augmented desire for vengeance. When he read that his mother herself repined, herself spoke disparagingly of her husband, he wondered at the mildness of Sir Boyvill's expressions with regard to her, and began to suspect that some strange and appalling design must be working in his head to produce this unnatural composure. The rest was madness, madness and misery, thus to take a wife and mother from her home, to gratify the insane desire to exert for 1/2 hour a power he had lost forever, the vain hope of turning her from her duties, which at least, as far as her children were concerned, were the dearest part of herself, her terror, her incapacity of mastering her alarm, the night of insensibility which she passed in the hut. With a start, Gerard felt sure that he had seen and marked that very spot. All wrought him up to the height of breathless interest, till, when he read the sad end of all, cold dew gathered on his brow, the tears that filled his eyes changed to convulsive sobbings, and despite his manhood, he wept with the agony of a child. He ended the tale, and he thought, "Yes, there is but one termination to this tragedy. I must avenge my sweet mother, and by the death of Falkner proclaim her innocence." But wherefore, it came across his mind, had his father called him murderer? In intention and very deed he was none. Why term the narrative a lie? He followed it word by word, and felt that truth was stamped in every line. The house was still. It was 2 in the morning. Had his father retired to rest? He had been so absorbed by his occupation that he had heard no sound, knew nothing that might have been passing around. He remembered at last Sir Boyvill's good night, and believing, as all was hushed, that all slept, he retired to his own room. He could not think of Elizabeth or of the projected duel. He could think only of the narrative he had read. When in bed, unable to sleep, he rose, lighted his candle, and read much of it again. He pondered over every word in the concluding pages. It was all true. He would have staked his existence on the accuracy of every word. Was it not stamped on Falkner's brow as he had seen him but a few hours ago? Sad and worn with grief and suffering, but without the stain of concealed guilt, lofty in its very woe. It was break of day, just as Gerard was thinking of rising to find and consult with his father, that sleep crept unawares over him. Sleep will visit the young unbidden. He had suffered so much fatigue of mind and body that nature sought relief. Sleep, at first disturbed, but soon profound and refreshing, steeped his distracted thoughts in peace, his wearied limbs in delightful repose. The morning was far advanced when he awoke, refreshed, ready to meet the necessities of the hour, grieved, but composed, sad, but strengthened and resolved. He inquired for his father, and heard to his infinite astonishment that he had left town. He had set out in his travelling carriage at 4 that morning. A note from him was put into Neville's hands. It contained few words. "Remember your engagement, that you take no steps with regard to Mr. Falkner till you have seen me. I am setting out for Dramore. On my return, which will be speedy, I will communicate my wishes, to which I do not doubt you will accede." Neville was startled. He guessed at once Sir Boyvill's aim in the sudden journey, but was he not a fit partner in such an act? Ought he not to share in the duty of rendering honor to his mother's grave? He felt that he ought to be at his father's side, and, ordering his own chariot, set out with the hope of overtaking him. But Sir Boyville travelled with equal speed, and was many miles and many hours in advance. Gerard hoped to come up with him when he stopped at night, but the old gentleman was so eager in his pursuit that he prosecuted his journey without rest. Gerard continued in the same way, travelling alone. He revolved again and again all that must be, all that might have been. Whatever happened, he was divided from Elizabeth forever. Did she love him? He had scarcely questioned the return his affection would one day meet, till now that he had lost her forever, and like a true lover, earnestly desirous to preserve some property in her he loved, he cherished the hope that she would share his deep regrets, and so prove that in heart they were one. How pleasant were the days they had passed at Oakley, all his sorrows there, and his passionate desire to unveil the mystery of his mother's fate. How had it given an interest to each hour, and imparted an untold and most sweet grace to the loved Elizabeth, that she should sympathize with so much fervor and kindness. How strange the chance that led the daughter of the destroyer to share the feelings of the unhappy victim's son, yet stranger still, that destroyer had a child. Rambling among many tangled thoughts, Gerard started when first this idea suggested itself. Where was Falkner's boasted fidelity, on which he laid claim to compassion and pardon, where his assertion that all his soul was centered in Alitha, and this child, an angel from her birth, was even then born to him? He opened the writing case which contained the papers and which he carried with him. He referred to them for explanation. Yes, Elizabeth then lived, and was not far from him, Her hand had stayed his arm, raised against his life. It was not enough that the frenzy of passion urged him to tear Elizabeth from her home and children, but even the existence of his own daughter was no restraint. He was willing to doom her from very childhood to a partnership in guilt and misery. Hitherto, despite all, and in despite of his resolve to meet him in mortal encounter, Neville had pitied Falkner, but now his heart grew hard against him. He began to revolve thoughts similar to those expressed by Sir Boyville, and to call Elizabeth's father an impostor, his tale a lie. He reread the manuscript with a new feeling of skepticism. This time he was against the writer. He detected exaggeration, where before he had only found the energy of passion. He saw an attempt to gloss over guilt, where before he had read merely the struggles of conscience, the innate innocence of profound feeling, combating with the guilt, which circumstances may impart to our loftiest emotions. His very sufferings became but the just visitation of angry heaven. He was a wretch, whom to kill were mercy, and Elizabeth, beautiful, generous, and pure, was his child. Chapter 35. That night was spent in traveling, and without any sleep. Neville saw the day break in melancholy guise, struggling with the clouds, with which a southeast wind veiled the sky. Nature looked bleak and desolate, even though she was still dressed in her summer garments. It was only the latter end of August, but so changeable is our climate, that the bright festive days which he had lately enjoyed in Sussex were already followed by chill and dreary precursors of the year's decline. Gerard reached Dramore at about noon. He learned that his father had arrived during the night. He had slept a few hours, but was already gone out. It appeared that he had ridden over to a neighbor, Mr. Ashley, for he had inquired if he were in the county, and had, with his groom, both on horseback, taken the road that led toward his house. Neville hastily took some refreshment, while he ordered a horse to be saddled. His heart led him to seek and view a spot which he had once before visited, and which seemed accurately described in Falkner's narrative. He left behind him the woods of Dramore and the foldings of the green hills in which it was situated. He descended towards the barren, dreary shore. The roar of ocean soon met his ear, and he reached the waste sands that border that melancholy coast. He saw the line of sandhills, which formed a sort of bulwark against the tide. He reached at length a rapid, yet shallow stream, which was but about 20 yards wide, flowing over a rough bottom of pebbles. The eye easily reached its utmost depth. It could not be more than 2 feet. Could that be the murderous, furious estuary in which his mother had been borne away? He looked across. There stood the hut, there the moss-grown, leafless oak, and gathered round it was a crowd of men. His father and 2 or 3 other gentlemen on horseback were stationed near, while some laborers were throwing up the sand beneath the withered trunk. When we have long thought of and grieved over an incident, if any outward object bring the image of our thoughts bodily before us, it is strange what an accession of emotion stirs the depths of the heart. For many hours Neville's mind had dwelt upon the scene in all its parts: the wild waste sea, dark and purple beneath the lowering clouds, the dreary extent of beach, the far stupendous mountains, thrown up in sublime, irregular grandeur, with cloud-capped peaks and vast gulfs between, a sort of cyclopean screen to the noble landscape, which they encompassed with their wide, majestic extent. His reflections had selected the smaller objects, the river, the hut, the monumental tree, and it seemed as if actual vision could not bring it home more truly. But when he actually beheld these objects, and the very motive of his coming was revealed, as it were, by the occupation of the men at work, his young heart, unhardened by many sufferings, sickened, the tears rushed into his eyes, and the words, "Oh, my mother," burst from his lips. It was a spasm of uncontrollable pain. An instant afterward he had mastered it, and guiding his horse through the ford, with tranquil mien, though pale and sad, he took his station abreast with his father. Sir Boyville turned as he rode up. He manifested no surprise, but he looked thankful and even triumphant, Gerard thought. And the young man himself, as he contemplated the glazed eyes and attenuated form of his parent, which spoke of the weight of years, despite his still upright carriage, and the stern expression of his face, felt that his right place was at his side, to render the support of his youthful strength and active faculties. The men went on with their work in silence, nor did any speak. The sand was thrown up in heaps, the horses pawed the ground impatiently, and the hollow murmurs of the neighboring breakers filled every pause with sound, but no voice spoke. Or if one of the laborers had a direction to give, it was done in whispers. At length some harder substance opposed their progress, and they worked more cautiously. Mingled with sand, they threw out pieces of dark substance like cloth or silk, and at length got out of the wide, long trench they had been opening. With one consent, though in silence, everyone gathered nearer and looked in. They saw a human skeleton. The action of the elements, which the sands had not been able to impede, had destroyed every vestige of a human frame except those discolored bones and long tresses of dark hair which were wound around the skull. A universal yet suppressed groan burst from all. Gerard felt inclined to leap into the grave, but the thought of the many eyes, all gazing, acted as a check, and a second instinctive feeling of pious reverence induced him to unfasten his large black horseman's cloak and to cast it over the opening. Sir Boyvill then broke the silence. "You have done well, my son. Let no man lift that covering or in any way disturb the remains beneath. Do you know, my friends, who lies there? Do you remember the night when Mrs. Neville was carried off? The country was razed, but we sought for her in vain. On that night she was murdered and was buried here." A hollow murmur ran through the crowd, already augmented by several stragglers, who had heard that something strange was going on. All pressed forward, though but to see the cloak, now become an object of curiosity and interest. Several remembered the lady, whose mouldered remains were thus revealed, in the pride of youth and beauty, warm of heart, kind, beloved, and this was all left of her. These unseemly bones were all earth had to show of the ever-sweet Alytha. "Mr. Ashley kindly assists me," continued Sir Boyvill. "We are both magistrates. The coroner is already sent for, a jury will be summoned. When that duty is performed, the remains of my unfortunate, much-wronged wife will be fitly interred. These ceremonies are necessary for the punishment of the murderer. We know him, he cannot escape, and you, every one of you, will rejoice in that vengeance which will be mine at last." Execrations against the villain burst from every lip. Yet even then each eye turned from old Sir Boyvill, whose vindictive nature had been showed before towards the hapless victim herself, to the young man, the son, whose grief and pious zeal had been the theme of many a gossip's story, and who now, pale and mute as he was, showed, in his intent and woe-struck gaze, more true touch of natural sorrow than Sir Boyvill's wordy harangue could denote. "We must appoint constables to guard this place," said Sir Boyvill. Mr. Ashley assented. The proper arrangements were made. The curious were to be kept off, and 2 servants from Dramore were added to the constables. Then the gentlemen rode off. Neville, bewildered, desirous to stay to look once again on what had been his mother, yet averse to the vulgar gaze, followed them at a slower pace, till Mr. Ashley, taking leave of Sir Boyvill, rode away, and he perceived that his father was waiting for him, and that he must join him. "Thank you, my son," said Sir Boyvill, "for your zeal and timely arrival. I expected it of you. We are one now, one to honor your mother, one in our revenge. You will not this time refuse your evidence." "Do you then believe that Mr. Falkner is actually a murderer?" cried Neville. "Let the laws of his country decide on that question," replied Sir Boyvill, with a sneering laugh. "I bring forward the facts only, you do the same. Let the laws of his country and a jury of his equals acquit or condemn him." "Your design, then, is to bring him to a trial?" asked Gerard. "I should have thought that the publicity—" "I design," cried Sir Boyvill, with uncontrolled passion, "to bring him to a fate more miserable than his victims, and I thank all-seeing heaven, which places such ample revenge in my hands. He will die by the hands of the hangman, and I shall be satisfied." There was something horrible in the old man's look and voice. He gloated on the foul disgrace about to be heaped on his enemy. The chivalrous notions of Gerard, a duel between the destroyer and his victim's son, was a paltry, trifling vengeance compared with the ignominy he contemplated. "Was not the accusation against your mother loud?" continued Sir Boyvill, "public, universal? Did not the assembled Parliament pronounce upon her guilt and decree her shame? And shall her exculpation be hushed up and private? I court publicity. A less august tribunal, but one whose decisions are no less widely circulated, shall proclaim her innocence. This idea alone would decide my course, if I could so far unman my soul as to forget that vengeance is due. Let it decide yours, if so much milk still mingle with your blood that it sicken at the thought of justice against a felon. Transported by rage, Sir Boyvill sought for words bitter and venomous enough to convey his meaning, and Neville discerned at once how much he was incensed by the language used with regard to him in Falkner's manuscript. Wounded vanity sought to ape injured feelings. In such petty, selfish passions, Gerard could take no share, and he observed, "Mr. Falkner is a gentleman. I confess that his narration has won belief from me. His crime, dressed in his own words, is frightful enough, and heavily, if it be left to me, shall I visit it, but the plan you adopt is too discordant with the habits of persons of our rank of life, for me to view it without aversion. There is another which I prefer adopting." "You mean," replied Sir Boyvill, "that you would challenge him, risk your life on the chance of taking his. Pardon me, I can by no means acquiesce in the propriety of such an act. I look on the wrongs he has done us as depriving him of the right to be treated with courtesy, nor do I wish him to add the death of my only son to the list of the injuries I have sustained." The old man paused, his lip quivered, his voice dropped. Neville fancied that tenderness of feeling caused these indications. He was deceived. His father continued, "I am endeavoring so far to command myself as to speak with moderation. It is difficult to find words to express implacable hatred, so let that go by, and let us talk, since you can, and believe doubtless that I ought, calmly and reasonably. You would challenge this villain, this gentleman, as you name him. You would put your life on a par with his. He murdered your mother, and to repay me, you would die by the same hand. If you speak the truth, if he possess a spark of those feelings which, as a soldier, you have a right to believe may animate him, do you think that he would return your fire? He raves about remorse in that tissue of infamous falsehoods which you put into my hands. If he be human, he must have some touch of that, and he could not, if he would, raise his weapon against the child of poor Alitha. He will therefore refuse to meet you, or, meeting you, refuse to fire, and either it will end in a farce for the amusement of the world, or you will shoot a defenseless man. I do not see the mercy of this proceeding." "Of that, sir," said Neville, "we must take our chance." "I will take no chance," cried his father. "My unfortunate wife was borne off forcibly from her home. You can bear witness to that. 2 men carried her away, and no tidings ever again reached us of her fate. And now one of these men, the arch-criminal, chooses to gloss over these circumstances, events, as pleases him, tells his own story, giving it such graces of style as may dupe the inexperienced, and we are to rest satisfied and say it is so. The absurdity of such conduct would mark us as madmen. Enough of this. I have reasoned with you as if the decision lay with me, when, in fact, I have no voice on the subject. It is out of my hands. I have made it over to the law, and we can but stand by and view its course. I believe, and before heaven and your country you must assert the same, that the remains we have uncovered are all that is left us of your lost mother. The clandestine burial at once declares the guilt of murder. Such must be the opinion of impartial judges. If I mistake not, I can interfere no further. The truth will be sifted by 3 juries. This is no hole-and-corner vengeance. Let our enemy escape, in God's name, if they acquit him. But if he be guilty, then let him die, as I believe he will, a felon's death." Sir Boyvill looked on his son with glassy eyes, but a sneering lip, that spoke of the cruel triumph he desired. "There is Ravinglas," he added. "There the coroner is summoned, there the court meets. We go to give our deposition. We shall not lie nor pervert facts. We tell who it was revealed to us, your mother's unknown grave. It rests with them to decide whether he, who by his own avowal placed her therein, has not the crime of murder on his soul." Chapter 36. Sir Boyvill quickened his pace. Neville followed. He was still the same being who in his youth had been driven to the verge of insanity by the despotism of his father. His free and feeling heart revolted from arbitrary commands and selfishness. It was not only that his thoughts flew back, wounded and sore, to Elizabeth, and figured her agony, but he detested the fierce and vulgar revenge of his father. It is true that he had seen Falkner, and in the noble though tarnished grandeur of his countenance he had read the truth of the sad tale he related, and he could not treat him with the contempt Sir Boyvill evinced, to whom he was an image of the mind, unseen, unfelt. And then Falkner had loved his mother, nay more, she as a sister had loved him, and faulty and cruel as had been his return for her kindness, he, through her, was endued with sacredness in his eyes. To oppose these softening feelings came a sort of rage that Elizabeth was his child, that through him a barrier was raised to separate him from the chosen friend of his heart, the one sweet angel who had first whispered peace to his soul. The struggle was violent. He did not see how he could refuse his evidence at the inquest already summoned. In every way his motives might be misunderstood, and his mother's fame might suffer. This idea became the victor. He would do all that he was called upon to do to exculpate her. The rest he must leave to the mysterious guidance of Providence. He arrived at the poverty-stricken town of Revingles. The legal authorities were assembled, and while preliminaries were being arranged, he was addressed by Sir Boyvill's solicitor, who asked him to relate what he knew, that his legal knowledge might assist in framing his evidence briefly and conclusively. Neville recounted his story simply, confining himself, as much as possible, to the bare outline of the facts. The man of law was evidently struck by the new turn he gave to the tale, for Sir Boyville had unhesitatingly accused Falkner of murder. This Falkner, he said, had concealed himself for the space of 13 years, till his accomplice Osborne was discovered, and till he heard of Gerard's perseverance in sifting the truth. Then, fearful the tale might be disclosed in America, he came forward with his own narrative, which glossed over the chief crime, and yet, by revealing the burial place of his victim, at once demonstrated the truth of the present accusation. It is impossible that the facts could have occurred as he represents them, plausible as his account is. Could a woman as timid as Elizabeth have rushed on certain death, as he describes? Why should she have crossed the stream in its fury? A bare half-mile would have carried her to a cottage where she had been safe from Falkner's pursuit. What lady in a well-known country, where every face she met must prove a friend, but would not have betaken herself to the nearest village, instead of to an estuary renowned for danger? The very wetting her feet in a brook had terrified her. Never could she have encountered the roar of waves sufficient to overwhelm and destroy her. Such were the observations of Sir Boyville, and though Gerard, by his simple assertion that he believed Falkner's tale, somewhat staggered the solicitor, yet he could not banish his notion that a trial was the inevitable and best mode of bringing the truth to light. The jury were now met, and Sir Boyville gave such a turn to his evidence as at once impressed them unfavorably towards the accused. In melancholy procession, they visited poor Elizabeth's grave. A crowd of country people were collected about it. They did not dare touch the cloak, but gazed on it with curiosity and grief. Many remembered Mrs. Neville, and their rude exclamations showed how deeply they felt her injuries. "When I was ill," said an old woman, "she gave me medicine with her own hand. When my son James was lost at sea," said another, "she came to comfort me and brought young Master Gerard and cried, bless her. When she saw me take on rich and grand as she was, she cried for poor James and that she should be there now. My dear mistress," cried another, "never did she speak a harsh word to me, but for her I could not have married. If she had lived, I had never known sorrow." Execrations against the murderer followed these laments. The arrival of the jury caused a universal murmur. The crowd was driven back, the cloak lifted from the grave, the men looked in. The skull, bound by her long hair whose color and luxuriance many remembered, attracted peculiar observation. The women, as they saw it, wept aloud. Fragments of her dress were examined, which yet retained a sort of identity as silk or muslin, though stained and colorless. As farther proof, among the bones were found a few ornaments. Among them, on the skeleton hand, was her wedding ring, with two others, both of which were sworn to by Sir Boyville as belonging to his wife. No doubt could exist concerning the identity of the remains. It was sacrilege to gaze on them a moment longer than was necessary, while each beholder, as they contemplated so much beauty and excellence reduced to a small heap of bones, abhorrent to the eye, imbibed a heartfelt lesson on the nothingness of life. Stout-hearted men wept, and each bosom glowed with hatred against her destroyer. After a few moments, the cloak was again extended, the crowd pressed nearer, the jury retired, and returned to Revingles. Neville's evidence was only necessary to prove the name and residence of the assassin. There was no hesitation about the verdict. That of willful murder against Falkner was unhesitatingly pronounced. a warrant issued for his apprehension, and proper officers dispatched to execute it. The moment that the verdict was delivered, Sir Boyville and his son rode back to Dramore. Mr. Ashley and the solicitor accompanied them, and all the ordinary mechanism of life, which intrudes so often for our good, so to jostle together discordant characters and wear off poignant impressions, now forced Neville, who was desirous to give himself up to meditation, to abide for several hours in the society of these gentlemen. There was a dinner to be eaten. Mr. Ashley partook of it, and Gerard felt that his absence would be indecorous. After dinner he was put to a trial more severe to a sensitive, imaginative mind than any sharp strokes of commonplace adversity. He was minutely questioned as to the extent of his acquaintance with Falkner, how he came to form it, how often he had seen him, and what had drawn confession from him. They named the criminal. These inquiries had been easily answered, but that the name of Elizabeth must be introduced, and as he expected, at the mention of a daughter, a world of inquiry followed, and coarse remarks fell from his father's lips, which harrowed up his soul, while he felt that he had no exculpation to offer, nor any explanation that might take from her the name and association of the child of a murderer. As soon as he could, he burst away. He rushed into the open air and hurried to the spot where he could best combat with and purify the rebellious emotions of his heart. None but the men placed as watch were near his mother's grave. Seeing the young squire, they retreated, and he who had come on foot at such quick pace that he scarcely felt the ground he trod, threw himself on the sands, grateful to find himself alone with nature. The moon was hurrying on among the clouds, now bright in the clear ether, now darkened by heavy masses, and the mirroring ocean was sometimes alive with sparkling silver, now veiled and dim, so that you could hear, but not see, the breaking of the surge. An eloquent author has said, in contempt of such a being, try to conceive a man without the ideas of God and eternity, of the good, the true, the beautiful, and the infinite. Neville was certainly not such. There was poetry in his very essence, and enthusiasm for the ideal of the excellent gave his character a peculiar charm to anyone equally exalted and refined. His mother's decaying form lay beneath the sands on which he was stretched. Death was there in its most hideous form. Beauty and even form had deserted that framework which once was the dear being, whose caresses, so warm and fond, it yet often thrilled him to remember. He had demanded from heaven the revelation of his mother's fate. Here he found it. Here in the narrow grave lay the evidence of her virtues and her death. Did he thank heaven? Even while he did, he felt with bitterness that the granting of his prayer was inextricably linked with the ruin of a being, as good and fair as she whose honor he had so earnestly desired to vindicate.